And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this August 13th, 2024. And today being Tuesday, we're watching a weather system that'll be crossing the western and central Aleutians on Wednesday. This system will be a rather strong Bering Sea low as it impacts areas of the west coast Wednesday night into Thursday. So starting out Wednesday morning, we find IFR conditions along the southwest, west, and northwest coast from the Chukchi Sea all the way down to Bristol Bay and then extending westward across most of the Bering. Inland, we've had a ridge of high pressure that'll building up into the south central areas of the mainland, allowing for VFR conditions once you get by any patchy fog in the morning. It's been very wet over this region the past week and a half, so as a result, this time of year, clearing can lead to some patchy fog in the morning, but that should lift. Some MVFR conditions are expected in the northern panhandle Wednesday morning. There's still a little remnant system that came through south central on Monday afternoon and evening, pushing its way eastward, though weakening. Wednesday afternoon, we're looking at generally VFR conditions across the southern and eastern mainland, IFR conditions out over the Bering and across much of the Aleutians, with MVFR conditions pushing further east of the Seward Peninsula and up toward the south slopes there of the western half of the Brooks Range. Now, by the time we get into Wednesday night and Thursday morning, low pressure will be coming out of the Bering toward the west coast. With it, stronger winds, a broad shield of moderate to locally heavy rain, and also the potential for some higher surf along coastal areas, as this is kind of what I would look at, say, the first early fall storm of note, to kind of seeing that we're now approaching that midpoint in August, not uncommon. And then areas of the Gulf, once you get out over the open waters, generally IFR conditions there. And for Thursday afternoon, as that west coast system tries to push inland, we will see IFR conditions along the west coast, along with, again, breezy conditions that'll lend toward turbulence. You'll have areas of rain and lower ceilings, along with potentially some higher surf along areas of the coastline. Stay tuned to some later watches, advisories, or warnings that may be issued for that system. And eventually it will be pushing further inland through the end of the week. And looking at what we have here midweek on Wednesday for Anatuvik Pass, VFR conditions becoming MVFR. Same thing, Adigan Pass there. VFR in the morning becoming MVFR. Chilkoot and White, Wednesday morning should start out MVFR becoming VFR, and that'll be the case as we round up along the Alaska Range. Generally, VFR conditions are expected. Rainy Pass up through the central Alaska Range, windy pass, and then eastward through Isabel and Mentasta passes. VFR conditions also down across the Copper River Basin. Generally, VFR conditions Wednesday. Can't rule out some patchy fog in a few spots. You know your airfield, you know your location has that tendency, especially if you've had some significant rain here in the last week or so. And even Portage Pass should generally be VFR. Chilkoot and White, MVFR, especially up there along the intercoastal mountains. There may be some lower ceilings and some lingering light showers in a few spots. So freezing levels aloft, we find lowest freezing levels are actually Wrangell, St. Elias Mountains on over toward the Alcan border, below 6 and even below 4,000 feet. Back to the north and west, there's a front pushing through the Bering Strait that's stalling out, and so we have lower freezing levels in the colder air behind the front across eastern Russia. And back to the south, as this North Pacific low crosses the Bering, it's going to try to pull some warmer air northeastward out ahead of it, so you'll see freezing levels bumping upwards along the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians at 10 and 12,000 feet. And of course, with this system, a pretty good wraparound area of rain that will include the potential for moderate icing across the lower Bering Sea, areas of the central eastern Aleutians sneaking up toward the end there of the Alaska Peninsula. But again, with the higher freezing levels aloft, we're talking about above 12,000 feet. Along the west coast, right along that stalled front, along and just behind it, we find freezing levels generally at or below 6,000 feet, and then right along and ahead of the front a little higher. So areas of the Seward Peninsula, lower Chukchi Sea coastline out to St. Lawrence Island, we're looking at the potential for some moderate icing above 8,000 feet. And even a little bit of isolated icing there in the northern panhandle on Wednesday, above 6,000 feet, intercoastal mountain area there, where a few light showers may still linger. Otherwise, here's the jet stream pattern, and we find that trough here over the Yukon into the Gulf, and then this ridge. This is the ridge that's going to be building northeastward from out of the North Pacific, first across the Alaska Peninsula and then up into the mainland. And then back to the north and west, here's a trough with the colder air back into eastern Russia. And then over here is kind of the hint of the next low coming out of the North Pacific. So Wednesday, here we have a band of winds at mid-levels, 9,000 feet or 700 millibars. Up here across areas of the Brooks Range, North Slope, central Arctic coast, 40 to 50 knot winds, trailing back to westerly winds, Seward Peninsula at 35 knots. And then here's the area of low pressure that will be crossing the central Aleutians Wednesday afternoon. And ahead of that trough, we find at mid-levels winds as high as 50, 60 knots from the southwest. At 3,000 feet, bring it down. Here's the low circulation. And on the backside of it, more northerly winds. Ahead of it, winds more southerly. And as a result, we find the strongest winds out ahead of this system, anywhere from 35 to as high as 55 knots there across eastern and central portions of the Aleutians. We also find a belt of winds, Seward Peninsula and up across the Brooks Range, central North Slope, Arctic coast, upwards of 30, 35 knots from the southwest. So the greatest threat for turbulence on Wednesday, first northwest mainland, south slopes along the spine there of the central western Brooks Range, as well as much of the Seward Peninsula. There could be some moderate turbulence, surface to 4,000 feet with that stalled out boundary sitting in that area. And then to the south, associated with this strengthening low, it's going to get a little stronger. It'll deepen as it moves up toward the central Bering Wednesday night. And with it, we expect that there will be some moderate turbulence across the central and eastern Aleutians, surface to 4,000 feet on Wednesday.